The young woman on the threshold of my house looked at me expectantly. She looked familiar, but slightly unsettling. Why was she carrying a shoebox? Something in her eyes and posture was like an almost forgotten dream that, upon awakening, darkened the rest of the day. It's been quite a while since anyone called me Mel. The woman, more of a girl, really, was too beautiful to be easily forgotten, that's for sure. Not my student. Someone from campus? Maybe, but I didn't think so. Much older than my children to be their girlfriend. Too young to be one of Sue's colleagues, and it all seemed wrong. She was from somewhere in the past, from another world. I'm sorry, sir, but the lid flew off the box, and a wave of memories came flooding back to me. Your name was in all the letters you wrote to my mother. My heart was pounding. Julia. Julia and Trevor. I swallowed. You are their daughter. Yes, sir. Louise White. She extended her hand, and I shook it. I muttered absently. In honor of her grandmother. Her face brightened, and a wide smile appeared on it. Julia's smile. Julia's deep, dark eyes. She was tall like her father, only a little shorter than me, but not lanky like him. She inherited her mother's curves. Her skin was a lovely café au lait color, somewhere between Trevor and Julia. This is true. I nodded, trying to gain time. I knew that was the name she was planning, but then the questions surfaced, too quickly for her to answer. Wait, why? I haven't talked to them in years. Why are you here? How did you find me? Why did you take the letters? Louise's mouth opened and closed a couple of times, probably trying to decide which question to answer first. I wanted to ask you a few questions, sir. David. Malcolm was my middle name, which I had not used for over 20 years. David, the letters are the reason I'm here, the reason I needed to find you. I don't know how you fit into my parents' past. I actually don't know much about their past, but I didn't realize it until recently, and I wanted to know more about them and about the person who wrote these letters to my mother. As for how, it took a while. And the fact that I finally found you was as lucky as anything else. She shook her head. I'm not some crazy person. I'm not stalking you. But when I found this in my mom's things, I had a lot of questions and I needed answers. Why don't you just ask her? Her face fell. I can't or don't want to. She sighed. I cannot. My parents, Louise looked into the distance. There was a fire there, and I was surprised by the pain I never thought I would feel again. I lost them for the second time. I never thought it would hurt this much. I never thought I could feel their loss the way I did. The sensation was muted, but it was there. That perhaps saddened me more than the knowledge that they were gone. Oh my God. I'm sorry, Louise. She gave me a small, grateful smile. Thank you, it's been a couple of years, but she shook her head. Anyway, I can't ask them. I can't ask anyone. All my grandparents died. My mom and dad had no brothers and sisters, and she shrugged. I think you're the only person who can tell me what they didn't tell me. Part of me wanted to tell her everything, answer all her questions. Part of me wanted the past to remain buried. Yes, they had a good reason for hiding things from her, and I thought that perhaps I owed them one. But then another, darker, almost forgotten part of me growled that I didn't owe them shit. But even if I don't owe them, what do I owe to myself? But then that hopeful look, so similar to Julia's, decided for me. Why don't you go inside? She was sitting at my kitchen table. Do you want something to drink? Water? Soda? Beer? Water, please. If it weren't for the late evening, I would have preferred beer, but supplied us with water. We sat and drank for a few moments until the silence turned from uncomfortable to suffocating. Are you really sure you want to know? Or is it just idle curiosity? At this point, I need to know. Look, I know it's weird, and I know it's too much to dump all at once. I'm sorry I just showed up at your house, but I couldn't find your home number anywhere, and I thought this is the kind of thing you should do in person, not at work. She took a sip. Before they died, Mom and Dad told me about how they met, about the life they had before we moved to Miami, about all this. And I know, or at least I think, after the fire, I tried for 2 years to figure it out, but I was never lucky. And now I understand that at least some of what they told me they said was a lie. Those letters were the first clue, and they made some old memories come together. Some photos of the three of you in boxes I found in the warehouse. The fact that my dad and grandpa had a fight and no one wanted to talk to me about the reasons. The way my grandma would shy away whenever I asked about how Mom and Dad spent their time before Miami. In the end, I gave up. It was just dead end after dead end, and I needed to stop obsessing over it. I was in my senior year of college when the fire happened, and I took a year off to figure it out. That led to me clearing out my mom's storage, which led to... She pointed to the shoebox. And then I went down the rabbit hole for the rest of that year, trying to figure things out, but no one could give me any answers. So I went back to college, got my bachelor's degree, and applied to the master's program. I nodded slowly. Then how did you find me? Louise laughed, a self-deprecating laugh. Pure dumb luck. I wanted to know more about the university that accepted me for my master's degree. I went to the website, looked through the pages of the various departments and found my photo. She pointed. Bingo. I don't mean to sound flippant, but you've really aged well. I recognized you almost immediately. I mean, the fact that your middle name was there helped too. The sweet young woman smiled sadly and lowered her eyes. Before I found your picture on the college website, I honestly thought you could be my father. That would at least make sense. I mean, secrecy. These letters are... Well, they really are something special. I winced slightly. Have you read them? I looked at some parts, but yes. You clearly, quite obviously loved your mother. Judging by the way she was with you in the photographs I found, it was mutual. And the dates? They contradict my parents' stories about their past. Taking a deep breath and exhaling gave me some time to collect my thoughts. Why don't you tell me what you know, or at least what you believe, and then we'll go from there. I don't need details, but for example, I didn't know that Trevor and Julia moved to Miami. So why not take a quick look at the past as you understand it? I guess... She bit her lip. Let's watch. They told me that they met in high school in a small town in Texas. They both moved there with their parents. My grandmother was going to teach high school Spanish, and my grandfather had some kind of office job. It was never entirely clear to me. They became friends, and then some, eventually moving to Austin to attend UCLA together. Then they unexpectedly gave birth to me, got married, and moved to Miami, where the rest of her family was. My mother wanted me to grow up next to my cousins. Eventually, Grandma returned. I was their only child, but they seemed like a happy couple. They were good parents. Mom was a teacher, Dad was a programmer. There didn't seem to be any dark secrets or anything like that. She shrugged. Then I went to school. Everything was fine with me, there was a fire, and I found out about this. Well, that at least my mother was in love with someone else. For most of the time, she and my father presumably were together. If I'm counting correctly, you started sending her these letters during your senior year of high school, and they didn't stop until almost the end of her sophomore year in college. You were engaged, and then the letters end. Louise scratched her head. It wouldn't be that strange, but there are photos of the three of you from the time you spent together. I thought maybe Mom tore everything up and you left, but it didn't match the photos. You, Mom, and Dad all looked like fast friends throughout your senior year at UCLA. So it must have been something else, but I can't figure out what it is. She had most of the information, but still not enough to put it all together. Louise clearly loved her parents. Perhaps it would have been better for her if she had not found out, but I could tell she was going to keep digging. I looked at the clock on the wall, then nodded to myself. Okay, I can tell you more about this later, but I need to pick up my kids from school. Why don't you have dinner with us? Her student life was definitely not a series of holidays, judging by the look on her face as she tried to balance decorum, not annoying the person who had the information she needed, and wanting to eat something other than ramen and frozen burritos. I do not want to be a burden. I invite you. This is not an imposition. Laugh at me. We could use some extra company. And perhaps the children will enjoy the idea that their old man actually has a past. Will your wife mind? She realized almost immediately that she had stepped on a mine, but the mine was old enough that it would not explode. Sue, yeah. I'm afraid she's no longer with us. She was an emergency doctor. The PPE protocols weren't very good at the beginning of the pandemic and, well, she suffered from asthma. They didn't know then how dangerous it could be. I smiled at her encouragingly. Everything is fine. You didn't know. Still, I'm sorry. Thank you. Anyway, I invite you to have dinner with us, and then we can talk some more. Unless you have somewhere you need to be. Louise agreed, and we climbed into my car. My children had noticeably different reactions to it. Dana, my 12-year-old daughter, was mostly uninterested. She was in that teenage stage where she was starting to find herself, or at least trying to, and cold indifference was her default mode. Louis, on the other hand, was 14 and hormonal, and Louise was a gorgeous young woman. He hung on her every word. As we sat in the restaurant eating, talking about nothing in particular, I was struck by how wonderful Louise was. I don't mean her beauty, she was a very smart, well-read woman. Her degree was in biochemistry, but she also loved literature, my field. She was kind. My son really liked her, and rather than ignoring him or teasing him, Louise instead talked to him as if he were almost the same age. Not in a way that he thought he had anything like a chance with her, but still enough to make him feel good, confident, rather than embarrassed. As expected, the kids really enjoyed the idea that Dad had a past. I never talked to them about it, probably for the same reasons that Louise's parents didn't discuss their past with her. At dinner, I mentioned my friendship with her parents, but nothing more. After we finished and returned home, I sent the kids off to do their homework and get ready for bed. Louise and I sat down on the sofa together to talk privately. They are wonderful children. Thank you. I'm very proud of them. They have, well, the last few years have been tough, but they've really bounced back. Better than me, probably. She smiled sympathetically. Louise, I want to ask you something. Yes? If my wife had a secret that would change their attitude towards her, do you think I should tell them? Maybe not now, but when they go to college? It was clear from Louise's face that she immediately understood what I was talking about, but she played along. I think it will depend. If it's something that would be good, then yes, definitely. Neutral, maybe. But the bad, she sighed. I think it will really depend on how bad it was. But their situation is different from mine. About? If this hypothetical secret existed, they don't have a hint of it yet. I have. I only have half the story, and I can't believe that what I imagined is worse than the truth. I took a deep breath. Now I'm going to say this. What I can tell you will change the way you think about both of your parents. If only I had met you and known you were their daughter. If you didn't have that shoebox full of letters, I would never, ever tell you about this. This will mean a big shift in the way you look at them. Be sure. Louise looked puzzled. I think she imagined something serious, but not at all what I meant. Before she could speak, I quietly continued. You love your parents, I see. I'm sure you had your differences with them, like all children do. But I want you to remember this. I can't believe they would ever tell you about this themselves. If you really need to know, I'll tell you. But you have to decide whether this is a real need or just curiosity that you have allowed to go too far. Because hearing my story won't make this problem go away, Louise. She nodded solemnly. Fine, I hear you. I'll think about it, really think about it. How can I contact you once I've made my decision? We exchanged cell phone numbers before she left. I didn't have to wait long for her call. A few days later, we were sitting in a cafe near campus. A little voice in the back of my head was muttering something. She was a student, and I was a professor. and certain incorrect conclusions could be drawn if one were so inclined. But she was not my student. I never taught her. I had no direct influence on her academic career. No ethical rules were broken, even if we were more than just a couple of acquaintances coming to talk. Thank you for coming, David. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, and the truth is that I worry about what I might find out, but I really need to know. It will gnaw at me until I find out. I nodded. Fine. Then let's start from the beginning. Your parents told you some half-truths and outright lies. Yes, your mom and dad met in their sophomore year of high school when they moved to a small town in Texas. What they missed was that I moved there the same year. The three of us bonded over the fact that we were all outsiders. Trev was from New York, Julia was from Miami, and I was from Los Angeles. My mother moved in with relatives. My father abandoned us, and she needed somewhere to stay, so we ended up in this small, remote town. It wasn't much to base a friendship on, but it worked. Trevor was the best friend I had at that point towards the end of our sophomore year. I knew he was interested in Julia, but so was I. And Trev, well, he was soft-hearted and humble, while I was the complete opposite. I grinned. Back then, I was a real rebel without a clue, and your mom was dragged into it. She and I started dating in our junior year. Trev accepted this gracefully and began dating everyone. We all made a pact that we would get out of this little hole together. And we did, going to UC Austin like your parents told you. The letters were, I wrote them to your mother because one of the few common interests we had was writing. When we were in high school, we exchanged letters back and forth. The rule in college at that time was that you had to live either at home or in the dorm for the first 2 years. The reason I kept writing letters to her was so that we would have something for each other while we couldn't be together. After her second year, there were no more letters because then we moved in together. We were engaged, just like you said. And we got married in the summer, between semesters. Louise's eyes widened. What? I nodded solemnly. We were married for 3 years. Of course, your father was our friend, but during that period he seemed to distance himself. Not really, I mean. He was my best friend, and probably Julia's too. He was the best man at our wedding, but we were newlyweds, and he was still trying to find someone, and I know he felt like he was on a bit of a third wheel. When we graduated from college, we had decisions to make. Julia's dream was to become a teacher. I wanted to get a master's degree and then get a PhD, but it didn't seem to work out. I promised myself that I wasn't going to be like my dad, some slacker who didn't care about his family. So I got my BA in English and went to work in advertising. I didn't like the job, but it paid well enough. I wrote some good material, and my bosses asked me to travel as part of a team that was attracting new clients. It meant more money, which was great. Julia and I wanted kids, and we decided that since she finally had a stable teaching job and I was making more money, she could get off the pill. And she did it. I took a deep breath and let it out slowly. When you said you thought you could be my baby, well, the truth is, you should have been. She covered her mouth with her hand. Mom and Dad, are they? I was out of town on business. I don't think. They told me, and I believed them, that it happened once and once only. He came to visit, I wasn't there, and they decided to hang out together, just the two of them, which they hadn't done for a long time. Trevor broke up with his girlfriend. Julia's hormones were out of control due to coming off the pills. They got drunk and high, and I shrugged. Tears began to appear in Louise's eyes. I felt for her and knew it would only get worse. Do you want to take a break? She shook her head furiously. No. I took a sip of coffee. I haven't told this story for many years. I expected it to be more painful for me, as it had been before, but most of all, I hurt Louise. They didn't plan to tell me. It was a mistake, they regretted it, and mutually decided that knowledge could only harm me. Julia was... She was trying to make amends when I got home. That's all I'll say. Trevor avoided me, and when I finally saw him, I knew something was wrong. I'm not sure if they could have continued like this, but then they were forced to tell. Julia was pregnant. She waited to tell me until she and Trevor could talk, and they told me together. I didn't even know she was pregnant until I found out about their betrayal. My gaze fell on my hands lying on the table. I'll be honest, I went into a frenzy. I attacked your father, but he didn't resist. He just kept his hands raised and tried not to hurt him too much. I stopped when he was on the ground, upset that he didn't give me the pleasure of a real fight. Julia just kept screaming for me to stop. I went out and got drunk as I've never been drunk in my life. Well, for a few days. Tears were now streaming down Louise's face. I saw her trying to formulate questions, but I just continued. She'll find out soon enough. I think Julia was hoping that by telling me that way, without putting the blame on me at the end of the pregnancy, if it was Trevor's baby, I would forgive her. Maybe I could be the child. If you were my daughter. People make mistakes. I could accept it and try to deal with it. I smiled sadly. Or maybe I wouldn't be able to forgive. I was so angry at her. After all, we were married for only 3 years. But like I said, I wanted to be a good father, which my father wasn't, so I'd like to think I could forgive in that case. However, I told her that there was no way I could raise another man's child that was the result of infidelity, especially one that, well, it clearly wasn't mine. This was before paternity testing could be done with a blood test during pregnancy, and none of us wanted to risk the baby's life with an in utero test. So the 3 of us were in limbo. Julia and I were married, but we slept in separate rooms. Trevor had almost completely disappeared from our lives, but we were waiting to see if he would have to intervene. And then you were born, and that was all over. My marriage was over, my best friend was cuckolding me, and I was in a job I didn't particularly enjoy. I applied to a master's program in California and, well, here I am. Louise squeezed out, "Oh God, drink something." She nodded and took a sip of her coffee, shaking and trying to regain control. I said softly, "It doesn't change anything about you, Louise. Your parents loved you. They lied to you because they loved you. You are their daughter, and your father did right by you." She laughed a short, sharp bark of laughter. "Yes, after he..." She shook her head in disgust. Why do you protect them? I'm not defending them, I'm protecting you. What they did was wrong. It was the biggest betrayal of my life and, until recently, the worst pain I have ever experienced. I frowned. But Sue's death completely eclipsed that pain. And even ignoring it, I laughed and pointed at Louise. That was a lifetime ago. Since your mother's divorce, about 7 times as long as our marriage lasted. What kind of misanthrope must I be to maintain my anger for so long? Don't get me wrong. I was bitter for quite a long time. Angry at the whole world. Furious at your father. I hated him. He stole my wife, my life, and my chance at a child. But I came here and made a new life for myself. I followed my dream and became a professor. I met Sue, and she helped me deal with this pain. She gave me 2 wonderful children and an amazingly happy marriage. I shook my head. What your parents did to me was terrible. But how did it end? I'm happy. If I'm honest, I'm probably happier than I would have been if none of this had ever happened. Louise cocked her head to the side. But you loved her so much. Letters. They were written by a child to a child. Yes, I loved her madly, desperately. It was love like a forest fire. Everyone should have at least one such fire in their life, but forest fires burn out. For those who are lucky in life, they become something stable, better in the long run. What we had with Sue? I smiled at the memory of my beloved wife. It was the type of fire that warmed the house we built our lives around. Maybe the fire that I had with your mother would have developed into something similar, but I sincerely doubt it. There just wasn't enough in common between us for it to work in the long run. Louise and I sat quietly for a while, then our food arrived. We ate slowly and in silence. When the bill came, I paid it, despite her protests. She didn't protest very much. After all, she was a starving college student. After that, she pushed the shoebox towards me and I pushed it back. No, I appreciate your offer, but no. I got rid of her letters to me a long time ago. I don't need it and I don't want it. You keep them for yourself. Thank you. Not only because of the letters, but because of, well, everything. She bit her lip. Is it okay if we talk a little later? I don't want to bring up bad memories, but I would like to know more about what they were like when they were younger. But only if you don't mind. It was nice. I told this story to someone who needed it. He didn't tell because he was forced to tell the therapist to curb his anger, and not like telling Sue to restore peace of mind. When I told Louise about this, it was almost like an exorcism. Or perhaps it was simply that, in analyzing my pain now, I found that it had diminished so much that instead I found myself mostly remembering the friends of my youth and remembering them with much more fondness than one might expect. But I think the most important thing is that, in the end, something good came out of it. What was the result of this terrible act? Look, my marriage to Sue, my career, my children, and most importantly, an intelligent woman, a biochemist, young, pretty, sitting opposite me. I don't believe in platitudes like, all things work together for good, but in this case, exactly. We'll talk, of course. I will be glad. I don't think that the memories of my youth will be painful for me. At first, our friendship with Louise was not very reliable, uncertain. I thought we had little in common other than my past and our mutual love of literature, but little by little our lives intersected more and more. Louise was a bit of a fitness fanatic, and I started joining her on morning runs from time to time. I wasn't very good at keeping in shape, but she was patient. I walked her through the office politics that always plague a graduate student's career. And as we got to know each other better, we developed additional common interests. She loved to cook, and I was a bit of a foodie. We both loved old movies from Hollywood's golden age. Our musical tastes coincided, and, as it turned out, there were many, many more small intersections of our personalities and our interests. She gradually became an integral part of our home, coming at least once a week, sometimes to cook, sometimes to help Louis with his chemistry homework, and sometimes to just spend time with my family. Then once a week turned into twice a week, which turned into 3 times a week. By the 5th month of our acquaintance, I saw that something was bothering her. But on that day, the day when all our lives changed, anyone could see that she was worried. She didn't want to talk about it, but I finally got it out of her. When I moved in, he seemed like a normal guy. I told him I was just looking for a roommate, and he said that's fine. But now he's stalking me, saying we should be more, and... She swallowed. I don't feel safe there anymore. But I don't know what to do. I have a lease, and I would either have to find someone to cover my share of the payment or pay a lease termination fee, and I just don't have that kind of money. And then I'll have to find a new place to live, and... Louisa. And then I'll have to find another roommate, and... I put my hand on hers. Louise. She looked up at me. Why don't you stay with us? What? In the guest room. Children love you. And I feel great with you. We are friends. The expression on her face was wary, but full of hope. David, I can't do this. This is your home, and you barely know me. I appreciate it, but... I laughed. Are you kidding? I've known you all your life. She blushed. Her skin darkened slightly. I'm serious. Come and stay with us. How much do you want for rent? I patted her hand. Sometimes you cook dinner in the evening, work with the children, and choose a movie together. Let's assume we're even. David, no! This is too generous. I need... My hand rose in a gesture of silence. You have to say yes. So when can you move? She smiled and looked at her hands. Thank you, David. Thank you very much. I went with her to pick up her things. There were only a few boxes, and she moved in later that evening. The roommate was angry both that she was moving out and that she showed up with another man. We had a conversation. I wasn't the hot-tempered young man I used to be, but I could intimidate when I needed to, except now I used words instead of fists. Words like exclusion, persecution, and police. I paid to terminate her lease. which caused another wave of protests on her part, and we left. The children, as expected, were overjoyed. First of all, they will no longer be obsessed with Daddy's cooking. Secondly, I didn't realize how much there was a lack of a woman in the house. Yes, she was not their mother and could never be. Instead, she played the role of a much older sister or a young, fashionable aunt, dispensing advice to Dana on everything from her changing body to boys and bullies at school. The first time I heard about this. As for Louis, she taught him not only his studies, but also how to dress and talk to girls. Louise cooked and I washed the dishes. Sometimes she would join me and laugh and joke. We sat around after the kids went to bed, sipping wine and talking about college politics or new movies coming out. It was convenient, and the longer she lived with us, the more comfortable it became. It became so comfortable that, like a frog in a pot of boiling water, I did not notice how anything had changed between us. Our occasional morning runs became daily. She teased me as she ran ahead and I tried my best to keep up. And it was on these runs that I first realized a problem with her living with us that I had not had before. She was attractive, and it had been a long time since I had been with a woman. There are some young women who do not know the effect their beauty has on the men around them. There are others who know exactly this effect and use it to their advantage at every turn. As a professor, I've dealt with both, and I've had unpleasant run-ins with underachieving late-class students in the past. Louise, however, was one of those who knew how beautiful she was and preferred not to trade on it at all. In any case, no more than the minimum requirements of social life. But when she was home with us, and especially when I was running around with her, none of that mattered. She wore tight lycra shorts and a sports bra, sometimes accessorized with a t-shirt. As she ran in front of me, her beautiful curves seduced me, teasing me as much as her words. Louise urged me to take care of my health, but her body awakened a hunger that had largely been dormant since Sue's death. When I had time after our runs, I took care of my needs like a teenager at heart. I had to, otherwise I would have been thinking about her all day. When I didn't have time, I took a cold shower instead. But it wasn't enough. I sound like a dirty old man, I know, but none of my students have ever had such an impact on me. Sue and I even tried out a little role play a couple of times where she was a student who desperately needed to change her grade and was willing to do anything to make it happen. I thought it was more stupid than sexy. In my classes, even the most beautiful girls didn't set off look but don't touch alarm bells in my head, and hadn't for a long time, not since I became a teaching assistant in my early 20s. But I had an emotional connection with Louise. She was already in my life, and we became closer every day. There were times when we were doing the dishes, and she would test me with her hips or slide behind or in front of me, and I would need to focus on my task to prevent a growing erection. When she went out with friends, I was fine. When she went on dates, I found myself getting a little jealous. Later, in an attempt to do something about this surge in my libido, I went on my first dates after Sue died. Every time I left, I thought I saw a hint of sadness in Louise's eyes. In Louise's eyes. When we first met, I saw so much of Julia in those eyes and that smile. When I looked at her, over time it became like that optical illusion, like an old woman or a young lady. I look at her for the first time and see the shadow of my first love. Then I look again and see the beautiful young woman who so often occupies my thoughts in the present. It wasn't fair to her, to us. I knew it was irrational, but my longing for her seemed almost incestuous. For the first 22 years of her life, I could define her almost entirely by what she was not. She was not my daughter. This single fact changed the entire course of my life. And yet, although she was not my daughter, she was the daughter of the woman I loved and married. And even though my broken heart had long since healed, even though I had found and lost love again a long time ago, I still felt uneasy when I sometimes looked into her eyes and saw the woman from my past. She was young. She was my ex-wife's daughter. She had a whole life ahead of her to spend with someone who could grow old with her. She had never shown any overt interest in me as anything more than a friend and mentor, perhaps even a surrogate father figure for those who had been torn from her life. And to top it all off, Although I told myself that my affection was for Louise, I always worried that I was projecting my feelings for Julia onto this woman who was so much like her in many ways. I cared about her well-being. I was a responsible older man, and so I put my feelings aside and abandoned my fantasies about her, disguising my romantic affection as nothing more than a platonic affection for a younger friend. But then events conspired to remove this disguise. The kids were at school and Louise and I ran as we did every morning. Sometimes I ran next to her when she was lenient towards me, but most often I was a few steps behind her. I learned to look at her shoulders and head when I ran. Without allowing my eyes to droop any lower, I began to put on basketball shorts for our morning practice. We stopped on the sidewalk in front of my house. This is our home now, the one she shared with my family. She truly was family now, thanks to the way she had grown together with us over the months we had been together. 10 months after meeting her, 5 after she moved in, and she was the vague but irreplaceable 4th member of our family. She was breathing heavily. "Almost caught me this time, old man." I didn't answer, huffing and puffing, trying to catch my breath. I wasn't even close to catching up to her, except when she let me. But I knew that after we started running, I felt in the best shape since I was her age. Once inside, she tossed me a bottle of water from the refrigerator, then took a long sip from her own. I looked away slightly, watching her lift the long, thin bottle to her lips, the way her skin glistened with sweat, the trickle of liquid running down her chin, the loud sigh after drinking too much and for too long. All of this was reminiscent of a much more intimate act. Our Wednesday post-run ritual was already so established that we didn't need to talk about what happened next. I showered while she did a little cleaning in her room. Then I left for my 10 o'clock classes. She would leave a little later, and if we had time, we would meet for lunch. As I passed, I gently patted her on the shoulder and headed upstairs to my bedroom. It was one of those days where I didn't have time for more than a cold shower. As usual, it didn't help much, but I got dressed and set off at my usual time. "I'll deal with my biological urges later." I shouted, "Goodbye," but there was no answer. Louise regularly worked with headphones on, so this was not surprising. However, when I went to campus, I received a surprise in the form of a call from a colleague. One of the construction crews working on the endless reconstruction of an English building ruptured a gas main. Half the campus was evacuated, and I had no reason to come. I was only 10 minutes from home, so I turned around and thought about maybe taking Louise out for brunch somewhere. But when I crossed the threshold, I heard her calling my name loudly, as if she was in trouble. My laptop bag fell to the floor as I ran up to her room. The door was ajar and I rushed inside. Louise lay on a queen-size mattress, almost completely naked, headphones drowning out any outside noise. And she was busy pleasuring herself when she moaned and called my name again. Clutched in her left hand was a familiar piece of paper, one of the old letters she usually kept in her shoebox. Her eyes were tightly closed as she gasped and moaned. "David! Oh God, David! Oh God, oh God!" Her beautiful body tensed, her dark skin glistening with fresh sweat. Her voice turned into a low growl before she howled, "I love you!" Louise trembled like a leaf. She had reached her peak. She was so beautiful that she easily surpassed the fantasies I entertained in the shower or in bed late at night. I stood rooted to the spot, unable to move, unable to even look away. Even if I could, I don't think I would want to. I knew it was wrong to see her like this, but she said my name. She said she loves me. How could I just leave? Then Louise saw me, and the spell broke. "Louise, She quickly moved to cover her nakedness, grabbing the sports bra that was lying next to her head. But then she saw my excitement, the hardness pulling on my pants. Her mouth opened slightly and she licked her lips. I thought you left." Her breathing was shallow, whether from a self-love session or new arousal. It was hard to say. I found it difficult to formulate a coherent sentence. There was a gas leak on campus. Closed. "Oh," she pulled the sports bra back over her head. Confusion showed on her face. I didn't want you to see this, I'm sorry. I could only laugh. Are you sorry? I sighed. I heard you calling me. I thought you were... It hurt, or I don't know. That you needed me. Louise slid off the bed and approached me with a shy, hopeful smile on her lips. Well, actually, it is. Her face was so close that I could lean down and kiss her. I just didn't know how to tell you. Maybe it will be better this way. She closed the gap by standing on her tiptoes and gently pressing her lips to mine. I really need you, David. I love you. Louise, Shh, David, just let me explain. I nodded, and she sat me down on the edge of her bed, not close enough to touch. Everything I told you is all true. The death of my parents, how I found the box of letters, all this. But what didn't I tell you? She looked down and smiled. When I started reading them, they seemed beautiful to me. So cute. The things you wrote when you were younger were so... Well, the letters were pretty rude, but so passionate. And as you wrote more, as you grew older and your love for my mother deepened, she chuckled. I was crazy. I was even jealous. I've never had anyone treat me like that. Or maybe there was something, but I've never felt anything like that for anyone. When I got to the end and the letters suddenly stopped, I admit that I became a little obsessed. Why did they stop? How could something shake so badly? Did my mom do something to drive him away? Or were these just beautiful words from the slacker who abandoned her? And then, when I thought more about it, about the possibilities, especially that you could be my father, a sad laugh and a sidelong glance. Well, I admit that it cooled my passion a little, but not the obsession with wanting to know what happened. However, as I said, I eventually gave up and decided to live with the idea that I would never know. She put her hand on mine. And then fate intervened. Or luck, whatever. I came across your photo. I learned the truth from you, and it broke my heart. That my mother rewarded such love with such disrespect. That my father was so dishonest, I think. I think I finally understood what caused the disagreement with my grandfather. He was such a faithful man to his son, who did this. Louise shook her head. But when I met you and learned this story, it made me feel... I realized that my passion had never completely disappeared. The affection for this boy, then for this young man, for the way he poured out his love in these beautifully written letters. And then I knew you. Really knew you. I recognized the person you have become since you first wrote these lines. Kind and sweet. You generously spend your soul on someone whom you, one might say, did not know at all. Great father. Devoted husband. So smart. So funny. She squeezed my hand and looked straight at me. I fell in love with you. I didn't just get carried away. I fell in love. But I knew your behavior was impeccable. Not only with me, but also with the students. Other girls on campus. I've been asking around a little about you, and I know you're one of those people who absolutely, positively won't tolerate even a hint of this kind of scandal. Not just because of your career, but because you're just a great guy. Good man. Louise moved a little closer to me and I turned slightly towards her. But God, David, God, I want so badly for you to just put this aside for me. I know I'm younger than you and you don't want to take advantage of that. I like it. But this is not taking advantage. I know the way you look at me, how embarrassed it makes you, but what you don't know is that I love it. Today, after all our runs, I wanted you to just grab me and kiss me. Every Wednesday, I come into the bedroom after you leave and read these letters and pretend they are addressed to me because I want it so bad. I touch myself, wishing that the person who wrote them would love me as much as I love him. She put her hand on my face, and I smelled, very faintly, her scent. You told me that everyone should have a love like a forest fire at least once in their life. You are him, David. You are my forest fire. Louise's eyes were so beautiful then, shining with unshed tears, afraid that I would reject her. Part of me said I had to do this, that she represented me as someone I wasn't. But I wanted her so badly, loved her. I longed to burn in this wildfire with her. All my doubts came to my mind as I tried my best to be an adult, a mature man, and they were all pushed aside by what she opened until only Louise's eyes remained before me. Louise's eyes, not Julia. I didn't realize until that moment that I hadn't seen Julia there for a long time, perhaps months. She was not Julia's daughter. She was Louise, a beautiful, wonderful person in her own right. It wasn't some kind of nostalgia. I loved Louise, and I loved her in a way I thought I could never love again. My hand wiped a tear from her cheek as I leaned towards her. Her mouth opened slightly, partly from surprise, partly from desire, but then her body jerked to close the distance between us. The first kiss she ever gave me was sweet and uncertain. This kiss was neither of those things. It was the spark that ignited our world. As our tongues danced together, Louise's hands pulled on my shirt. She was quickly dropped. I gently pushed her back onto the bed, finally looking at this beautiful young woman without guilt. I kissed my young lover. Louise let out a happy sigh. "We made love," she whispered. "It's so good, David. Please, please. I like it, please. I love you. I'm yours, it's yours. Show me, baby. Show me that I'm yours. I love, ah." She reached sweet heights, muffling her words for a while. She buried her face in my neck and hugged me tightly. For me, it was after a long break, but I was determined to stick it out as long as I could. Louise was enthusiastic and vocal, passionate and athletic. She encouraged me, praised me, and begged me. I wanted to be the best lover, the best man she could dream of. "I love you, Louise." Her eyes filled with tears, and the two of us reached the finish line. She kissed my neck, nuzzling it as our pulse slowed. Then, when we were lying together, she pressed herself against me and settled in the crook of my arm. It was, David, I want more. I laughed. "Maybe a little later, honey. Disadvantages of falling in love with an old man." "Stop that. You are not old. You are experienced." I snorted. "Ancient. Kiss. Skillful. Decrepit. Seasoned." I couldn't resist. "Tempered, huh? Do you want to try?" With a big smile, she slid down, and I discovered how easily she could make me feel young again. The morning and early afternoon continued much the same, with short breaks for a light lunch and then a shower. In truth, neither turned out to be that big of a break. We had to clean the kitchen much more thoroughly afterwards than if we had just eaten, and we probably came out of the shower dirtier than when we entered. But then, after, we sat on the sofa and talked. She rested her head on my lap as we finally reached my limits. At least for now. "I love you, Louise. Are you sure?" I sighed, stroking her hair. "Are you sure this is what you want? I want you to have a good future, happy life. And I'm much older than..." She pressed her finger to my lips. "You're not much older. This isn't the 19th century, David. You'll live to a ripe old age, and I'm going to take you jogging every day to make sure of it. And I have already started preparing the healthiest dishes." "A treacherous woman," Louise laughed. "Whatever it takes, baby. I need to make sure you live a long time. Now I'm yours. No retreats." "What about the children? Dana and Louis?" She bit her lip. "I hope they don't mind. God, I don't even... Damn." I laughed. "No, it's not about them. They love you. They love Louise, the cool big sister. I'm not sure how they'll feel about Louise too." She fell silent, not knowing how to finish this sentence. "To the cool stepmother? Can I hope so?" She blushed even as a wide smile spread across her face. "Really? I don't expect... I know it's new and I don't want to..." Now it was my turn to silence her. "This is true, if that's what you want. It doesn't have to be formal, but I'm not looking for anything casual. I'm in love with you. And I want it to be serious, with serious intentions. Not right now, not necessarily even next year. But I don't want to just be your teenage crush, okay?" Louise choked, unable to speak. then hugged me tightly. I felt her nod her head fervently, pressing herself against my stomach, then lightly, "Yes. God, yes." We just sat there for a while. Then I sighed. "But about children, do you want them? If you got pregnant today, I would—" "Oh, shit. Wait, are you taking pills?" She laughed long and loudly. "Yes, of course it is. I'm excited and in love, not stupid." She loosened her grip on me, rolling her head back onto my lap and staring up at me. "I hope they have your eyes. Yes, I want to have children with you. If you're worried about leaving them, don't be. I'm going to keep you in shape, remember?" A devilish smile flashed across her face. "At the end of the day, you need to maintain your stamina." Louis and Dana took it better than I expected. Dana simply shrugged and said, "It's about time," and then went off to play Roblox. Louis was a little gloomy. I don't think he ever completely gave up the idea that he might end up courting Louise in some way. But then, later, when we were watching TV together, he said, "So, Louise, huh?" I nodded. "Cute." And he nodded back, a tiny show of respect, from a teenage boy. This was perhaps the biggest surprise of the day. There was a little commotion on campus, but not too much. No ethical boundaries were crossed, and I had a good reputation from the start. Louise's family proved to be the biggest stumbling block. Some of them knew about my past with her mother and treated me like some creepy old pervert, but she ended up reading them the riot act in very fast and loud Spanish that I could barely follow. After that, no one really dared to talk about it to Boo. A couple of years later, we got married. She looked radiant in her wedding dress, 5 months pregnant with our first child. Louis was my best man, a responsibility he took very, very seriously. Our marriage was happy and full of love. By the time we were old, Louise had a chest full of letters from me in which I told her of my love for her, sometimes with tender and chaste words, sometimes not. There's no way in hell we'd let our kids read them. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.